setup, and we're going to go through all the steps that are needed to have alerts get sent out automatically based on data values that you've configured. And those we'll be going through in Vista Setup. We'll stop briefly in Comm Center, and then we'll go to Send Alerts for another brief introduction. I've been working on some documentation related to this, and hopefully I'll be able to send that out to the whole group of users maybe by the end of this week, so that will be good. So to start out, you have to have users to send the alerts to, and it starts with this little people icon here. And when you click on that, you'll get your personnel management, so you can set up the usernames. This is Joe Blow, and we also have Andy's wife, and I guess I'm not even in here, so we'll go with drdas. You'll see here that the drdas user has the email address of support set up. This is the address that Send Alerts will send data to in the event an alert occurs. So when you're setting up users, address in Envista Setup is the address to which alerts are sent automatically. Then you have to set them up as a user, so you'll see here that Joe Blow actually isn't a user, but drdas is. So you have to be a user here. You can do that by saying add user, and then we would pick Joe Blow and say his name is Joe Blow and his password is Joe Blow 1 and Blow 1, because that's our passwords are always easy, right? So we'll do that. And now he's a user, so he could theoretically get alerts. So you add them, give them an email address, then create them as a user. And then the last step related to the user is to be setting them up with role at stations. So if we go to, we'll start with the roles. If we go here, we have Joe Blow, and he could be set up with the role of view. This means that he won't be an editor. He'll just be a viewer. He'll just report on the data, and he'll be eligible to receive alerts. Select the type of alerts that he should receive. So in this case, we'll give him email alerts. And then you can select all the stations that he should get email alerts for. See, you can be selective, and we'll say any alerts at Kamloops or Rochester or in Hawaii. So once we've done that, we can save, and we're good. Yes?
For work, I never use my personal name, you know.
Is there a question out there?
Sorry.
It's okay.
I'm just logging in.
Okay.
I forgot to mute you.
Well, we just have gone over the users, and now we're going to move into setting up the alerts at each station. So I'll summarize the users once again. You create the person, give them an email address, and then you make that person a user on the Users Management tab. And then in the Roles Creator Wizard, you assign them to stations and select the email alert that should be sent to them. Pop-up alert, it relates to Envista. You could, of course, always check that as well. As an aside, this is also where you set up their editing ability. So that's how you set up a user. Now you would go to the stations and set up each alert type that you want.
Nathan, can I ask a question?
Yes.
For the SMS alerts, obviously you have to enter phone number when you set up the user. Is that right?
There's two ways that you could do this. The better way is to just send the email to the phone. The second way is to buy an SMS modem and send it as an SMS. The SMS modem part isn't well used because they're kind of difficult to configure. So most people, in fact, it's never been used as long as I've been here, so it'd be a learning experience for me if we went to set that up. Most people just send them to the phone's email address, which when you go into Joe Blow here, you could put in, let's say, so VText.com is the Verizon domain that emails are at. It's usually the phone number at some domain. To get that domain, there's lots of websites you can look up. That's the best way to send the SMS alerts, I think, because it transmits them as an email to the phone.
Okay, thank you.
And just to be clear, the phone doesn't have to receive email. It doesn't have to be a BlackBerry to get alerts in this manner. This would come in as a text message on my phone. Okay, so that's the users. We'll go back to the station now. We'll click the little house to go back to the station. We'll save those changes. We'll go to the Alerts tab. Now this is where we can see the alerts that are set up and add new alerts. We're going to start by just adding normal alerts, and then if you remember in the last call we discussed default alerts. I'll touch on that again briefly. So we can say add alert, and you'll see below the alerts set up here is a configuration area for the alerts. So we'll select the CO monitor, and we'll start with the above alert type. So you see that you have the option to pick the monitor and the type of alert. From there you can configure the alert, and they're all a little different. We'll go over them all. The interval, it needs to be either the station's time base or greater. So if the station time base is 60, you could put in an alert for 1440 and get that daily alert when the average is, well, in this case, in an above alert, when the average is above a value. So if we want a daily alert on the CO when it's above, you know, I don't even really know a realistic number, 0.200 ppm, I guess. So when the alert is high, when the daily average is higher than that value, the alert would go out. Well, the alert would be triggered. To have it go out, you would have to check this enabled box, so that turns on the alert, and you'd have to check the email box to make sure that it gets sent by email. So you need to turn on the alert, send it by email, and then you can configure your average interval and your value. Again, this is above 0.2. We could save that, and you'll see it appears in the list then, and from there you can actually edit the alert. So if we wanted to go back and say, okay, let's just do 60, you could change that down and click Save Alert. That's how you would add an alert and edit an alert. Now we'll go through each of the other alert types and talk about what they mean and how to set them up. We'll add another alert. We'll also add this for CO, and this will be a below alert. We'll pick the time interval again. Let's just stick with 60. So an hourly value that is below 0.0. So anything that comes in as a negative number will be marked as an alert value, and when we check enabled and when we check email, it will be sent out by email. We can move on and do the status alert. So this says, whenever the data logger returns a status of down or too few samples, we have it enabled and we check the email, you'll get an email alert based on that. So down and too few samples would send an alert out to the users for this station. Are there any questions so far? We'll go into more alerts here. I just want to take a second because I want to make sure I'm getting through to everybody. Okay.
Yeah, it's worth
trying. The next type of alert is
we're not still logged on. We're not seeing the webinar. But I'll keep trying, I guess.
Okay. Well, I am actually remembering to both record it, and I think other people are able to see it. So maybe it's your internet connection, and you might need to retry connecting.
So did you not record the other ones, the earlier ones?
No, I recorded all of the earlier ones except for the last one. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And I'll probably redo that one at some point soon anyway, just so that I can get a recording of it. Okay, so we're moving on to peak alerts, and this is when a high value, a peak value, suddenly comes in. So if we say the interval is 60 minutes, that's looking at 60-minute values. And if the value changes as a percentage of the scale for the monitor, then we will have an alert. So if we say 10% of the scale, that means that 1 hour, if this were a 0 to 500 monitor, if 1 hour were 20 and then the next hour were 71, that would be an increase of more than 10% of the scale of the instrument, meaning that the alert would be triggered. So we would have to check the enabled and check the email so that we could have that sent to us. We also have a different box here called validate data. This means that if this alert happens and you have this box checked, that value would be marked as invalid. So it's kind of a pre-validation mechanism for you so that you can have some data marked as invalid in advance of your actual validation process. The constant alert is a bit like it's the opposite in a way. If instead of an extreme change, if there's no change. So the percent, again, although it doesn't say it, it refers to the percent of the scale. So we can say if there's a change of, actually, yeah, just 1. If we say 1, that means if there's no change within 5 ppb or whatever over the course of 24 hours, that's 24 hourly samples, then we would have the alert be sent. Again, this has the validate data checkbox, which means that if the alert is triggered, the values at that point would be marked as invalid. This is useful not so much for maybe a CO monitor, but something like wind direction or wind speed where you have a mechanical device that might fail. The correct data alert is probably the most complex alert that we have. You will set a starting date using the calendar. So you could say January to December, so that it's all year long. Or you could just have it be a seasonal type of alert. This alert will correct data based on what comes in according to your settings below during the period within the starting date and end date. So a common use of this is to mark data that is extremely negative as invalid. So what we could do is we could say values from -2 to 0 should be marked as 0. And this means that everything that's less than -2 would be marked as invalid by default. So if you got a -3, it would be marked as 0. If you got a -1.5, it would be, if you got a -3, it would be marked as invalid. If you get a -1.5, it would be marked as 0. And if you get a 1, it would be marked as 1, of course. The trick to this is that you have to fill in all 6 boxes. So if you have if we're working with CO and it's 0 to 500, we could change this to say everything from 999 to 999 equals 999. We've filled in all the boxes. It's out of the range of the instrument, so we're never going to see this, and that means that we're only really using this portion of it. The inverse is kind of true. Let's say you have a BAM instrument that would be sending out a data string of 985 if the data were invalid, and for some reason you didn't have the data logger set to mark that as invalid. What you could do is set up an alert here where you could say, okay, the BAM's not going to go negative very frequently, so you could say from -2 to -2, set it to -2. But then you could say if it goes above 984, then it needs to be marked invalid. So if it is above the high number in the high range, or it is above the low number in the low range, it will be automatically marked invalid. Are there any questions about the correct data alert?
Nathan, what I guess I was thinking about the previous one when you say you check a box to validate the data.
Mm-hmm.
Which database does that invalidate?
It does not affect the raw data tables.
Okay, but like in New Jersey, we keep a 1-minute database and an hourly database. Which one is it going to invalidate? Or both?
Oh, so it's based on this interval that you select here. So if this interval, if you select 1, which I can't do because I don't have 1 as a time base here, if you were to select 1 and you would just say, okay, 10% or whatever we had in there, and you were to say 1440 samples, so a full day with no change of greater than 10%, then it would start marking the 1-minute data as invalid. It would not affect the hourly, well, sorry, in your case it would affect the hourly data because you do your calculated averages when you do your polling, right?
At some stations.
Yeah, so when you do those calculated averages, it would look at these data tables and then automatically integrate that into the hourly averages that it calculates. If you were polling the hourly averages, it wouldn't affect those. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, I understand. Okay.
Okay, any other questions about these data alerts that we've gone over? There's still a couple more to go over, but they're kind of different. Okay, move forward. Like I said, I'm going to have a document that has all of the stuff we're talking about in it in a nice little 2-page document. Been working pretty hard on condensing it but making the language understandable. So I hope to have that out eventually. We'll move on to the next 3 alerts, and then the last 2 I'm going to not talk about, basically because they're for medical monitoring. So, okay, so no data alert. For this one, you don't really have to pick a channel. I mean, you have to pick a channel to assign it to something, but it's inconsequential. What you're going to do is put in a time period for which you've received no data from a station. So if you say 1440 in minutes here, it's in minutes. When there's no data received by a station for 1440 minutes, then you would get an alert. Communication alert, this is more of a station alert again. You only have to set it up once in a station, and the monitor type that you select is inconsequential. It only has the enabled checkbox, and this is a good alert and it's a bad alert at the same time. It's a good alert because if you have very robust communication, you will only see this when there's an actual communication error, and that could be, very rare if you have a strong communication network. If your telemetry is not so good and you occasionally do have phone modems that drop calls and all of that, every single one of those would come back to you as an alert. So it can be very overwhelming if your telemetry is not perfected or robust. But basically, when Comm Center goes out and does a poll, if there is an error, period, any error, it will send you an alert based on it. I actually generally don't recommend this alert, but if you have a very strong communication network, it should be okay. And the last one is the edit data alert. Again, if any data comes in from the station that has been marked as edited at the station level, both in NVDAS FW and NVDAS Ultimate have the capabilities of editing data at the station level. If that happens and you've checked this box, you can get an email alert if you find that data has been edited at the station. That's all of the alerts. That's how you set them up individually. You already saw how to set up the users, how to give them an email address, make them a user, and then give them stations. This is how you configure the alerts that appear at the stations. I'm going to touch on the default alerts again. This is something we talked about in the last call, but I just want to touch on it briefly. Remember, when you're setting up the monitors, the monitor types, you can come to this tab and say Monitor Types Alerts for CO, and we could add an alert. And we could say a constant alert of 40, validate data enabled email. So we could save that. And now if we go back to Rochester, and we say the Alerts tab, and we say Add All Default Alerts, oops, I guess that didn't work this time. I think it's, oh, I know what it is. Probably the time base here. Or not. I'll have to look at that. It worked during the last meeting. When you would click that Add All Default Alerts button, then those alerts that are relevant to the monitors at the station would appear in this list under normal circumstances. Obviously, our test database is having an issue here. So that's what the default alerts are. It lets you pre-configure alerts that are common within your network, and then you can add them to the stations with just 1 or 2 clicks. Okay, so that's it for the setup program. Now we have to go into Comm Center for 1 second so that we can check one small setting. Guess I don't have all my menus. Oh, I'm in a tree. If we go to the Properties window, and the MISC tab, there is this checkbox here that says Enable Data Quality Check. That tells Comm Center that when it's doing its polling, it needs to look at the values and see if there are any alerts that it needs to enunciate. So it needs to give out any alerts that happen. That is an important setting. The second setting is that this priority setting. When you have correct data alerts, Comm Center does add it to the edit history. It does put it in a record so that there's data integrity, but it also edits with a level of user. So this is the level that you'll set for the user. Of course, if you set it as supervisor, then nobody can really change the data if they're just a normal editor. So you need to set it to editor in most cases. So enable data quality check, priority, save. Now Comm Center is ready to go and process alerts correctly. The last step of the process is the Send Alerts program. When Comm Center gets an alert, it writes it to a table in the database. It's kind of just an alerts queue. And Send Alerts will periodically, very quickly, at a high rate, it will check that table to see if there's any alerts that it needs to send. There are some very advanced settings for configuration in Send Alerts, so I encourage you to look at the manual. I'm just going to show you where to put the mail server settings and how to test it. So if we go stop all, and we go into the properties, the email comm tab is where you'll put in your server information. This has to be a SMTP server. It can support anonymous logins, but it can't be anything like Exchange. So it has to be an SMTP server. Your IT department will probably provide you with the server name and the from email address. The username and password, again, if it's anonymous, you can just check this anonymous box and leave those blank. If it's something that requires logging in, then the username will work. From there, you can click Test, Mail, and this test will actually fail because that server is not real. But you just fill in an email address, type in a test message that you'd like to receive, and click Send. And once you start the service again, you'll see that it sends the message, or tries to. maybe that server does work. I don't know. But that's the fundamentals of sending the alerts by email. From configuring the user, assigning them to the stations, adding the alerts to the station, maybe setting up the default alerts, checking comm center settings, and then finally verifying that send alerts is going to work by doing a test. And I guess, yes, surprise, you'll see that I did get the email. So I guess that mail server does work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good.
Okay, so that was pretty much the whole hour and a half, or the whole half hour. I guess it just seemed like an hour and a half. Feel free to ask questions now. Okay, well, we'll just call this a wrap. I'll send out that document as soon as it's done, and as an aside, I think I'm going to have to move the responsibility of getting the webinars online to somebody else because it's clear that my schedule does not permit me to do this. So they will be we still intend to post them online. It just hasn't happened yet, so I apologize for the delays.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. I hope everybody has a great day, and thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan.
No problem.
Bye-bye.